Hi, welcome to True Crime with me, Emma Kenny. If you like my channel, please subscribe. It really matters. I love your likes, I love your comments, but it's really nice to know that you'll be coming back every single week. I release my content same time on a Sunday, 7 p.m. in the UK. So make sure your notifications are on and then you will never miss one of my episodes. Thanks for the support. Today's case is one of the most disturbing cases that I've come across. And I heard about it a while ago. And I've kind of looked into it, but initially with the news reports about it, I didn't really feel that I could get a really in-depth perspective. And when I actually looked online, there were quite a lot of conflicting reports. But then I've managed to see quite a few documentaries now on this particular subject and dug deep into child services and the results of what those child services kind of explored and found out. And so the consequences, now that I feel like I can really dig deep into this situation. I'm going to be talking about the Hart case. Now, some of you might have heard about this case, but hopefully I'll be able to give you some added value as I talk you through what happens. I'm going to be honest, this is one of those cases that as a parent you're going to struggle with, and particularly if you're a parent who has adopted or fostered children, because personally, having worked with young people for many, many years, and specifically for 10 years of my life, I was working with kids who were in really problematic situations and homes. I was involved in a lot of child protection reviews, and I've heard stories that are really chilling and disturbing. And often children in care are the most abused children. So when they arrive with a parent who's meant to be taking care of them, they already come with so many bruises because life hasn't been fair. So what you want in those scenarios is to find a warm, inviting, loving, caring, compassionate home where even though those scars can't fully heal, the tissue around it can become stronger because of the way that they're treated. So if you're a parent out there who's fostered and adopted children, you'll know exactly what I mean when I talk about this. And this case centers around a group of those adopted children. These girls met at the Northern State University. They had been at different universities separately, but then they both transferred there. That gives us a first insight into the kind of transience that exists within these young women's lives. It will play out throughout the narrative that I go through. There is something about both of these women very early on when we're introduced to them not necessarily holding firm wherever they go. It's an interesting character trait that seems to exist within both of them. Both of the women were training in elementary education. Arguably, that suggests that they have an interest quite early on in a vocation around helping children. In fact, one of them was looking at special educational needs. So to some degree, they have hopes and aspirations of being involved with children and some vulnerable children. At this point, do I think their heart is in the right place? Yes, I really do. Even though only one of them graduated, the point was that they had graduated, or at least mostly got to a point of graduation, in really understanding and learning the vocabulary of how to work with children. And that, like I said, should be a positive trait, right? That we know that they're interested in vulnerabilities and that they have an interest in education per se. Tends to be a nice trait when you like kids. Now, these women got together back in the early 2000s. Obviously, in the early 2000s, gay, lesbian, trans, experienced, non-binaries were coming out, but they didn't necessarily get the same kind of reaction as in 2021. So even though there was definitely an evolving LGBTQ plus experience and acceptance, there was still a lot of prejudice. And I suppose when you look around the world, let's face it, you can still get stoned for being homosexual in certain countries, thrown off buildings, for example. So we haven't arrived at a place where it's easy to be gay, but it's easier in 2021 than it was back in the early 2000s. But a lot of people were out and proud back then. But to some degree, they felt that they met quite a lot of prejudice. They began their relationship at university, as I said, and initially they didn't actually talk about the fact they were in a relationship. They found themselves in a situation where they just didn't trust the way that they would be responded to. I know that when I was hanging out in 2000 and 2002, I was always in the gay village, and lots of my friends were gay, and at the end of the day, I didn't necessarily feel back at that point that there was a need to be closeted, unless you came from a highly religious background where I fully understand that people have to prevent people being aware of it in their family might experience abandonment and rejection. But it does, to me, say something about how they felt about themselves, because sometimes we can have this real conflict, can't we? We want to fit into a particular paradigm, let's say a hetero paradigm, because it's more simple than being authentic and honest with ourselves about who we are, and accepting the fact that it's okay for people to reject us. Who wants people who don't like us in their lives anyway? Who wants bigots as friends? But is that saying something about their paranoia? Is there a paranoia about what they expect they're going to experience? And that's important, because as the story moves on, I certainly believe that paranoia plays a part in both the story and, of course, the consequent end of the story. Now, Jennifer herself suggested that when they came out to people, they would find themselves ostracized. So arguably, they're saying that when people found out about their relationship, people would not want to have them in their world. I don't know who they were hanging out with. Life's subjective, right? Maybe they did just happen to know lots of really bigoted, homophobic people. Arguably at university, I would think that that was not the case in the 2000s. I would say that there were probably a lot of LGBT plus areas that they could go and enjoy and hang out with and create lots and lots of social experiences with them. But I can't absolutely say that that's the case. But it kind of makes me a little bit concerned that they move because they feel that people are ostracizing them because of their sexuality. And this kind of begins the way that their life will play out. It seems like as soon as people start to get to know them, they just move on. And a lot of people who are aware of this couple, they're aware of them for a certain period of time. And it kind of gets to me when I hear some of the interviews of their friends, because to me, a friend can be somebody online. Of course, they can be supportive. Friends can be people that we meet and build an incredibly strong relationship with in 6 months. Friends can be people that we see from time to time. But really, an in-depth friendship, somebody who can genuinely say that they know who these people are people who spend intensive amounts of time with them, not just in shades of them. They often move so that they often lose that opportunity for those shades to arrive. A striking thing for me about this particular couple is that they don't seem to have roots. So the relationships with the wider family doesn't seem to exist. Everybody can agree that families are dysfunctional. I have had dysfunction in my family. Pretty much everyone I know has had dysfunction in theirs. But usually there remain threads, right? So there are people within your family unit who you will still have a relationship with. It's really unusual for there to be a blanket rejection and abandonment. But when I look at their past, what is notable to me is they seem to sever links with their families, both of them. Now, that is strange. Not because we might meet somebody who has a very similar experience to us and that creates an empathy, and one of the reasons we connect over relationships is because we have some similarities in those experiences, such as not having a great relationship with our family. But it can also say something about two people making an active choice to leave behind who they were to create who they are. And on one level, people can go, well, that makes sense, reinvention is an art, isn't it? Look at Madonna. But on another level, it kind of says people who can just walk away from their families sometimes don't necessarily have the empathy and the compassion levels that we would expect. We also know from anecdotal evidence that they are intensely private on one level. I say on one level because it's highly ironic when I start talking in the future about just how much we know about them. even though they're really private people. Now, Sarah and Jennifer, as a couple, decided that they wanted to have children of their own, and they fostered a young girl. She was a young teenager. She was somebody who'd had a really difficult background, and she found herself with this apparently loving couple. She felt protected, she felt safe, well fed. There were no real altercations, and she felt like she genuinely had a family. In fact, she recounted that they made moves to suggest that she would be adopted fully by them. I want you to think about that kid. When you've had an utterly dysfunctional upbringing to the point where you're in the system, and we all know that the system is challenging. It's challenging wherever you are. But once you're in it, getting out of it is really difficult, and it can predictate to some degree what's going to happen to you in the future. Because if you don't have support, then where do you go when you fall? So this young teen suddenly finds herself in a situation where she's got the family that she's probably always dreamt of. She's safe, she's cared for, she's told, we're going to look after you. We're going to make sure that you have the foundation of support that you need. And then one day, when she's 15 years old, both Jennifer and Sarah take her to her therapy appointment. A lot of young people who have been through the system have therapy to help them to come to terms with some of the problems that they've had, their attachment and abandonment. And they take that child who's suffering probably from really severe attachment and abandonment issues and trauma, and they drop her off at the therapist's appointment. And that's where she's told, by the way, they're not coming back. They're not coming back. They didn't even say goodbye. They just abandoned her there, left her at the therapist's office, suggested to the services that were looking after that placing and placement that it was due to the fact that this girl was problematic and suicidal and self-harming. And actually none of that was true, by the way. That was just a way of ensuring that they had her removed. They were the victims, not the child. At that point, as far as I'm concerned, if that child was spoken to and that evidence was given, the Harts should have been blacklisted. Simple as that. If you've got a child in foster situation who has got horrible issues and trauma from the past, and then the way that they end that relationship, not even with an exit strategy, just with a full-on cut, we no longer want you. Think about the compounded impact that would have. If you were a social worker, would you be like, hey, these are right for the job. They're the kind of people who'll take a child in, make promises, and then just leave them without so much as a goodbye. Seems like a perfect fit. But that's exactly what happened. It really pisses me off that that kind of thing occurs, because they get paid to do that, you know. People get paid, and it's a good amount of money. Believe me, it's a good amount of money. So we know that these are not stable so far as foundations go. Think about it. No contact with their family, constantly paranoid that people won't accept them, moving around constantly, promising the world to somebody and then just dumping her completely because she didn't fit whatever their next narrative was going to be. We're not looking at a couple who are probably the people that we would like to see other children placed with. And that is judgmental of me. But that's because I've worked in child protection, and that's what you do. You make judgments. And I'd have said, not a good fit. Don't have continuity and consistency. Can't offer an honest placement where I can genuinely feel safe, that the children are going to be safe. In 2009, Jennifer and Sarah do get married. They go to Connecticut to do that because it's not legal everywhere. So obviously they want to show their commitment. But also it helps a great deal when you think about adoption situations if you are married, because it creates a legal stability. And obviously if you want to prove that you are responsible, this can be an addition that will really help you to do that. So as I say at this point, it's pretty important to recognize that they've had a really bad impact on this completely innocent teenager who's just had her dreams absolutely ruined, which is why social services, child services decide that they're obviously a great fit to not just have one more child, but let's give them 6. Just give them 6. I mean, they've proved their capacity for compassion. They've proved for their empathy for children. So we may as well just give them 6 children when they couldn't actually cope with 1. But that's what happens. Abigail, Hannah, and Marquise were adopted from Colorado County, Texas. The placement came on March the 4th, 2006. The reason for this is that the children's biological parents had their parental rights cancelled by a court in Harris County, Texas in August. The formal adoption came up in September, and in June the following year, they adopted 3 additional children: Kira, Devontae, and Jeremiah. Devontae, Jeremiah, and Kira were born in 2002, 2004, and 2005. So this was a group of really close kids. They originated originally from Houston, and their biological mother lost their custody because of the fact that she was a drug user. But let me make it clear. They were being well cared for by another family member. Their auntie was taking care of them. And she was a really, really good auntie. They were happy, they were well fed, they were well cared for, they were safe. And do you know why the auntie lost permanent custody of them? Because she was going for permanent custody. And let me tell you, the evidence is very clear. Children who are kept with their biological families are children who thrive better than children who are fostered out to people that they don't necessarily know, because they still have links, they still have roots. That does not mean that kids don't have great foster placements. Absolutely doesn't. Does it mean that adopted children don't thrive and have the best lives with incredible parents? I'm saying the research says if you can find a family member to adopt those children so that they don't lose their roots, then there is a better outcome for them on an attachment level. Makes perfect sense. Let me tell you why she lost custody. One night, she was offered an extra shift at work. She didn't have any childcare. She didn't want to leave them alone. So she asked their biological mother to come over and sit for a few hours. Social services came and did a spot check. You can't imagine how unlucky that is. And when they did that spot check, they instantly removed those children and they rejected the auntie's opportunity to adopt. She didn't even get a warning. Now, this is completely wrong. Even when you listen to the county judges and the lawyers who were involved in that particular situation, when they reflect on this, they recognise that that shouldn't have occurred. Those children did not need removing from the auntie's care. Okay, she'd made a mistake. She had allowed the biological mother to come and sit for her for a few hours, and therefore, arguably, she could have put them at risk because this woman might have got high. But it didn't happen. And secondly, that's about helping her to understand the potential impact of those actions. But instead, they're removed immediately. And guess what? They get really lucky because the Harts have already got 3 children. So why don't we just give them another 3? That's right. Now, the Harts, who didn't actually know how to look after one child and probably did massive damage to that child by just dumping her at a therapist and expecting that person to pick up the pieces, they've now got 6 kids. And I'm going to say this even though some people will feel that this is unfair of me. Those 6 children were black children going to 2 white women. I appreciate that this does not mean you cannot have great relationships. But what I am saying is that aunt who is of their same ethnicity would have been a better call. Simple as. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion. White people make great parents, even if they've got black children. Of course they do. I'm just saying, research-wise, evidence-wise, would have been better to stay with the aunt. Every single one of the children that they adopted were just beautiful children. They stood out. There was just something that was quite unique about them. And I know a lot about them because, oh my God, the amount of sharing on social media about these children was, in my mind, completely over the top. And secondly, it took me 2 seconds to see the pictures and go staged, staged, staged. It really disturbs me when I look at the pictures. It's like looking at an advert. You know, when you get those really unrealistic adverts and like everyone's smiling in a certain way. It's like Stepford Wives and they're all like, yeah, this is completely natural. And you know that it doesn't feel natural at all. That is their entire Facebook experience. I'll put lots on so you can see these. But to me, it's seconds and you're like, this does not feel right. Children are spontaneous beings. You can try to get them all to smile at the same time. You can try to get them pose all at the same time. But as I can testify to having been a mother and had children that were young, you know, I often have pictures where there's a bit of a head there and then there's like a bit of a top of a head down there. And it was going to be a beautiful photo, but they moved because that's what kids do, isn't it? Not the Hart kids. It's literally weird when you look at the photographs. The way that the Hart family dynamic is that Sarah Hart works, she works at a store, and Jennifer stays at home to look after the children. She's the primary caregiver. And we also know that there's a huge amount of financial assistance from the state, which makes this possible. So they're not struggling financially. But Sarah is known as a diligent worker, and she has some relatively good relationships with her co-workers, one of whom she actually confides in that it's not good to have a big family, and that really she and Jennifer shouldn't have adopted the children. That gives you insight, doesn't it? It gives you insight into the regrets that they are having and feeling for adopting all these children. Now, all the children were absolutely special individually, but Devonte Hart stood out because he became part of the national spotlight, so to speak. When there was the Ferguson unrest, which was basically around Michael Brown being killed by the police, there were obviously protests. And Devonte is pictured giving a policeman a hug, and he was crying, and it was deeply emotional for him in that moment. I also wonder, when he was hugging, whether hugs meant something really special to him, because he wasn't necessarily getting the kind of hugs that he required at home. It's the way he clings on, and there's a couple of pieces of footage where you'll see that he's really clinging on. And I almost feel like there's this missing connection. He's just like wanting someone to hold him. But that picture from that 2014 protest essentially became iconic. It was everywhere. It was a scene and a sign of hope during a time of pain. And you would imagine that his parents would have been super proud. You know, this is your adopted child. Look at the impact that he's having in that one gesture in the world. But that isn't the result as far as the Harts were concerned. In fact, they saw this as a gross invasion of their privacy. Again, I find this really strange because I'm going to put lots of pictures on that show you just how often they were taking pictures. They were taking pictures all the time of the kids, constantly, on social media, and writing about it. But when one gets in the national press, not happy about it. What does that say? I mean, why would you be bothered? You'd be celebrating it, wouldn't you? You were there, your kid did something amazing, and now everyone knows. Get on the Ellen show. Probably end up with a free car and a 10,000 check. You know how it is? That's what it works like in America, isn't it? They do all this celebration, and rightfully so. No, they don't want anything to do with it. Again, that instantly makes my hackles go up because it's not linear. It doesn't make sense. And I'm always looking for things to be linear. If something is meant to be as good as it appears, then I need evidence for that. And I'm not getting it. You can Facebook all you like, you can say your life is perfect, but if I'm not seeing that result when you're actually in the spotlight and you seem to almost want to reduce that kind of level of invasion, then what are you trying to hide? And that image was so iconic, it became known as the hug felt around the world. Devontae always feels like an old soul whenever I watch footage of him. And there's this particular event called the Beloved Festival, because Sarah and Jennifer Hart were always at festivals and parading their children like they're the perfect family. And Devontae actually gets on stage and hugs a guy called Xavier Rudd, and it's beautiful. It really is. It's like he's completely caught in the moment, but he's also like smiling but tearful. And part of me is like, what is this child crying out for? And people are filming it, and it gets again on social media, and Jennifer and Sarah Hart are really happy that it's got out, because it just is this expression of pure love. But remember, behind closed doors, his life, Devontae's life, is nothing like what we're seeing in front of the camera. Now, as I said, Jennifer Hart in particular was very active on social media. She used social media to act like they were the most perfect, loving, happy family. She was also constantly going on about politics and race and equality and all the trips that the kids went on. They were always at festivals. They were regularly seen by others as this perfect family, the family that you'd aspire to be. Triumph over adversity, incredible adoptive parents. Who wouldn't love them? On reflection, when I tell you about what actually happened to these kids, you'll understand why, when people reflected and looked at those photographs, that as far as they were concerned, it's all staged. And actually, the minute that those kids stop having photographs taken, they go back to being lifeless. So it's almost as if they've been trained to act in a certain way. And the minute the cameras go off or the video stops, it's the minute they stop too. Now, whilst the Hart family are living in Minnesota, Hannah Hart is seen with bruises on her left arm, and teachers actually do ask her about it, and she says that Jennifer's hit her with a belt. So we recognise at this point that school become aware that the children are potentially at risk. Again, lots of people do hit their children. I completely disagree with it. I don't think you create rational, well-adjusted children when you hit them. Adults hitting kids, a bit like a giant hitting a child, it doesn't make any sense to me. But whatever, everyone's got their own views. But when that occurs, that obviously alerts people, and that's deeply worrying for the Hart parents. And months afterwards, literally months, every single one of the 6 children have been pulled out of the public school system for a year. At that point, there should be an investigation and an inquiry, because I cannot tell you how common it is where children who allege a parent is doing something to them suddenly find themselves pulled out of the system. Because if you're out of the system, it's easier to abuse your children without prying eyes. We also know that Abigail Hart, she said that she had hours on her back and stomach, and that was meant to be over a penny that she found. But because Sarah and Jennifer Hart didn't believe her, they basically put her head under cold water and hit her. Now that's terrifying. That's not rational. That's not a normal punishment. That's deeply abusive. Over a penny. I mean, who would even find the energy to be upset about a kid who finds a penny? That says that somebody is actively looking for a reason to harm a child. Abusers do that. Never has to make sense. That's one of the ways that abusers keep their victims quiet, because if everything is a potential threat, any behaviour has a potential consequence, you're just going to act in a way where you absolutely feel that nothing that you do can cause you injury or pain. And even when you do something as innocuous as finding a penny, that still results in aggression and hostility. Those kids are in danger at this point. Because of that particular scenario, the authorities get involved, and all of the children claim that they've been spanked constantly, they've been deprived of food, and let me tell you, there's video of those kids where they look emaciated. They show their ribs. They're dancing around, but you can see their ribs. And when we look at child abuse, it's actually pretty unusual that children are deprived of food as punishment. People can do some really shitty things to kids, really awful, but it's high level abuse when you take away that human right. And it is a human right to eat. And think about children. What on earth would provoke that desire to starve them? Now, whilst it was suggested that Jennifer and Sarah were responsible for that abuse, it seems that Sarah decided to take responsibility for it. She pled guilty to assault and she was sentenced to a community service for a year. Why are the kids not taken off them? This is crazy. We've got a situation where this is the second period of abuse that's been reported. All the kids are saying that they're being assaulted. On top of that, we've got a parent who's admitted it. And these kids were removed from a loving aunt just for allowing the mother to babysit for a few hours. But it's perfectly acceptable for these two women to beat the living daylights out of these kids and just get away with it. And I'm going to bring in race here, because it is amazing how white middle class people do tend to get a very different treatment in certain circumstances than, shall we say, people of other ethnicities. That might be hard to hear, but it's evidenced. It's evidenced. So somehow these violent women are still allowed to be in care of these 6 children who are posing beautifully on social media. And of course, if it is on Facebook, then it is real. It must be. There could not really be abuse when they're wearing matching outfits and all turning their head and smiling weirdly into a camera as if it's just a really natural pose. I mean, it drives me crazy, because these are the moments where these children should have had a completely different outcome. But instead, they're just allowed to carry on. The kids were at this point put back in school. Doesn't surprise me, because Jennifer and Sarah Hart would likely want to seem like they had nothing to hide, and keeping them out of school might have meant that they were now more on the radar, particularly because one of them has been found guilty of abuse. A year after that abuse is discussed and she's convicted, Hannah actually tells a school nurse that she's not ate all day. When Sarah Hart is asked about this, because with respect to the schools, they're obviously taking these kind of claims seriously, Sarah Hart just says that Hannah's playing the food card. And she actually recommends that Hannah just be given water. I mean, how many insights do we need into this situation? This is really awful. Not only is it that this child is saying, like, I've not been able to eat all day, I've not been fed, as opposed to Sarah Hart being like, yeah, I should have given her some breakfast. She's like, the child should just receive water. No one should accept that. It's like, you should not receive children. That's the key. And let me tell you, these adoptive parents, they were making a lot of money. The reason that one of them was a stay-at-home parent is because the aid they were getting for the children was substantial. They did not live in a small place. They lived in big homes. They had access to lots of opportunities because they were making a lot of money. And I don't know whether they just wanted to create and cultivate this idea of a perfect family, but I think that the money was definitely an incentive. Why, when they're clearly abusive and they're not enjoying being with their children to some degree, hence wanting to starve them, why would they keep them? I mean, things aren't adding up, are they, at this point? They're starving them, they're abusing them, they're taking them out of school, putting them back in school, but then at this point, again, they take all the children out of public schools and they say they're going to homeschool them. They've got quite a good excuse, haven't they? After all, when it comes down to it, they did an early education and special education degree. Only one of them passed, but nonetheless, they can probably evidence that they're the kind of people who can manage that. And you know, there are investigations going on everywhere. In 2013, authorities in Oregon began their own investigation into the Hart family after being notified of the allegations in Minnesota. So this investigation included separate interviews of every single one of the family, as well as interviews of people who knew the family. Now, 2 family friends said that the children were forced to raise their hands before speaking. couldn't wish each other a happy birthday, couldn't laugh at the dinner table. Others said that they were really poorly fed, that they looked small for their ages, and they did. You know, at 14, they looked 9. And one family friend reported that Jen had ordered a pizza for the children, but each of them was only allowed one small slice. And when she discovered that the pizza had been eaten, she punished them by not feeding them breakfast and forcing them to lie on their bed for 5 hours. In fact, friends of the family said that the children acted scared to death, quote, of Jen. And also that they were like trained robots. That's reports directly from the mouth. That's reports directly from the mouths of apparent friends of the family. I mean, when your friends are saying stuff like that about you, they're probably withholding quite a lot of information. I mean, as a friend, you kind of have a loyalty. So when you're talking to authorities about that and you're still saying things like they're scared to death, they act like robots, they don't get fed, they're punished if they overeat one slice of pizza, we're at a point, aren't we, where these children are in a severe position of danger. Sadly, when the children were interviewed, they didn't actually bring up any other incidents of abuse, and they didn't actually bring up anything that had happened in Minnesota previously. Scared children don't speak very often. None of us know what went on behind those closed doors. None of us know whether those children were absolutely terrified about the consequences of what would happen if they spoke. I mean, you could just tell those children, couldn't you, that they were all going to be split up? Because it's really easy to manipulate children. It's easy to make them feel guilty. It's easy to make them feel like they deserve what's happening to them. And threats are powerful. We know that in abuse. So many people put up with abusive situations because they genuinely believe that the consequences of admitting it will be worse. And with respect to them, when they have admitted it, what's happened? Ask yourself that, because people will always say, well, why didn't they speak out when they were interviewed? Well, because nothing changed. And actually, it probably got significantly worse. So when the social workers are interviewing these children, if they expect them to be like, oh yeah, well, mum beats me, and they believe that maybe they're the only one who's going to speak out because all the others are under threat, they're then going to think, what on earth will happen when I get home? That's why children don't speak out, because they're protecting their siblings and potentially protecting themselves as far as their life is concerned. What's mind-blowing within this is when Jennifer Hart is interviewed, she's like, no, this has got nothing to do with us. This is just everybody else not accepting that we are white lesbian mothers with 6 African American children. So the friends of the family are suddenly intolerant, even though they're friends of the family. Doesn't really make sense, does it? But somehow it washes. In the end, the investigation doesn't conclude that the Harts are guilty of anything. It doesn't believe at this point that there's a safety threat. I don't get it. I don't get it. I think that they had trained the children to present in a certain way, and I think they were very convincing. They were educated women. They were always going to protests. They had evidence on Facebook that they just had this great family, and this cover just enabled the horror behind closed doors to continue. I can't imagine how those children must have been feeling in those meetings. They must have been wanting to just say, we are in a terrible situation, please help us. But how could they trust that anything would change? How badly had these children been let down already? Their whole life has just been a series of abandonment. And here they are, trying to trust the services that already have failed them on several occasions. And I include removing them initially from their aunts, particularly for the 3 who were potentially going to have been given a life full of love, surrounded by people that they knew in a neighbourhood that they'd grown up with, in a situation where their ethnicity was fully embraced as well. Now the Hart family then move again. Listen to how this works. If you want to successfully abuse people, You make sure that you get away from the situations which are causing you the most problems. So they moved to Woodland in 2017. That's at a point where, again, they're reestablishing themselves. And if you look at the properties that they moved to, they're becoming more and more isolated. It's a big house, has a huge garden. As a parent, if you've got 6 kids, what are you going to do? Those kids are going to be in the garden all the time, right? You're like, school's over, mum's tidied the house, remove yourself, play outside, come in for tea, go back outside, go to bed. That's good parenting, right? Your kids can be as loud as they want, they can climb trees, they can forge resilience, they can have fun. There's 6 of them. They've got a whole youth club there. Never seen outside. Instantly, massive alarm bells. Why would children, 6 of them, not be seen constantly playing outside? I feel terrified for them. Everybody who's ever had a child. If you imagine moving to a gorgeous place with just this rolling land around you, as a great parent, you'd just be embracing it, wouldn't you? That it was safe for them to play out, that there were so many of them, they could have so much fun. You just imagine a garden full of laughter, joy, running, playing tag, doing all the things that childhood is about, but nothing. In fact, one of the neighbours recalled that the only time they'd really seen their children outside is when it had snowed, and Jennifer and Sarah came out and took photos of them and got them to all smile and pose, and then they all went in. What you see online is not what is playing out in reality. In August of the same year that they moved to Woodland, Hannah Hart jumps out of a 2nd-story bedroom window. It's about 1:30 in the morning, and she's desperately trying to contact her next door neighbour. And when they obviously open the door, the DeKalbs are met with this girl crying, pleading, please don't let me go back. They're racist, they abuse me. She's literally begging them, don't let them know that I'm here, just protect me. Imagine what that must be like for the neighbours. I mean, personally, I will be really honest with you. At that point, that child would have been going nowhere. It wouldn't matter what the parent said to me. I would have that child kept till 911 arrived. It's one of those things that I'm like in life. If a child is telling me there is a problem, I will accept the child's narrative over the parents, because you've got to check. But understandably, I appreciate that it must have been a very challenging situation for the DeKalbs. So when Sarah Hart and Jennifer Hart arrive at the DeKalbs' house, they kind of storm in, and Dana, who is the proprietor, obviously senses that something's wrong, because they're kind of like in that house looking like they can go and get Hannah out of there without even any kind of communication about what's happened. And Dana kind of stands there and is like, hey, hang on a minute. And Jennifer senses it's not going to be quite as simple as she believes, so she sends Sarah and the kids back to their house, and she's going to resolve it. And the reason that she explains that Hannah has done this is because she is the daughter of somebody who is a drug user. Therefore, she's a drug baby. You know, this is just kind of normal, typical behavior. You know, it's just one of those things that happens. You know, drug babies, they throw themselves out of windows, running and asking and screaming for help. I mean, it's just par for the course, right? And Dana had taken some medication to sleep, so she was really drowsy. And it was actually her husband who made the call and was like, you know, let's not get too involved in this domestic affair. And Hannah is actually found in the main bedroom, and she's kind of hid between the bed and the bedside cabinet. And when she's coaxed downstairs, essentially Dana said that she just knew something was wrong. She was really worried about what was going on, because she felt that there was something untoward that was happening. She just had a sense. Having said that, she allowed her to go back to the house. And the next day, a note is actually sent to Dana, and it's explaining by Hannah why it's all her fault and that she's really sorry. She fell out with her brother and she got frustrated. So obviously being frustrated with your brother makes you run to a neighbour's house screaming and begging that you're getting abused and you're living with a group of racists. But nonetheless, Then she sends round the kids to all apologise as well. So this is not the way you would expect this kind of situation to go on. You wouldn't expect that the way to manage it is to send all these children round after a note's been sent apologising for the behaviour, and then to all kind of in this weird Stepford Wives type way acknowledge that they were all in the wrong. That's just not what a parent does. Yes, the parent might want to go around and have a conversation about it, but not the children. Again, these children are being used, in my opinion. They're just being used. They're just there for show. Now, there is obviously something that plays on the DeKalb family's minds, because Dana's father comes and she recounts the story to him. He wasn't there. He didn't see it happen, but he calls the authorities, and I'll put the phone call in so you can hear it. You can hear what a good human being this man is. You can hear that he's desperate to save those children. He actually thinks they've been kidnapped. He believes that they're being held against their will, and he just knows that something just isn't right. He also notes that people don't see those kids, so he's obviously got that parental intuition that something really bad is happening.
Some kids that I feel is being highly abused, and I can't wait until Monday in Woodland, Washington.
What's the address?
Okay, I'm going to give you the address of my daughter's house because it's right next door.
Okay, what's going on there?
Well, they have 4 black children, which that part doesn't matter, and they're new here in Texas. But the other night, a little girl jumped out of the second-story window on the roof and then down onto the ground and ran to my daughter, and this is like 2 in the morning, begging them to help her.
When did that happen?
About 3-4 nights ago.
Okay.
And my son-in-law doesn't want to get involved, but the more I sit on it, I just can't live with it. Somebody's got to go there and check on these kids.
So how old was the little kid that did that ran to your daughter's house?
About 12 years old, 13. And when they came looking for her, she was begging my daughter not to let them know she was there. And then eventually my son-in-law let him know. And then she had all 4 of the kids come back later and to say everything was okay, and they were all standing at attention like they were just scared to death. And I think there's something very serious going on there. And they're here from Texas. The kids might even be kidnapped.
Okay. And so did the girl ever say why she was scared?
No, she was crying, and it was 2 in the morning, and my daughter said the biggest problem was she's half awake. She couldn't believe what was going on. And and basically my son-in-law is like most people, they don't want to get involved. And so he's keeping my daughter out of it, but since she's told me about it, I just can't live with it. I'm very concerned for these kids. I just can't let this go any longer. Those kids, I think, is in very serious danger.
So just after the event with Hannah, Devontae starts turning up at the DeKalbs, and he turns up with one intention, which is he wants food. He asks whether he can get things like peanut butter, cured meats. He then starts arriving with lists, and it's clearly lists to feed his siblings. Devontae was just one of those souls that was so protective. You know, it wasn't just that he wanted free hugs when he went to festivals. There was just something so giving about this child. And then, over time, Dana DeKalb starts to ask questions. She gains his trust, and he starts being open with her, little by little, about what's happening. And he says that whenever they're punished, they're not fed. And he's really slim, he's really skinny. And then he also adds, over time, that they are being punished, they are being physically abused. At that point, Hannah knows she has to absolutely report the Harts to Child Protective Services. Now, I don't know what prompted what happened on March the 26th, 2018, but what I do know is we're at a point where I would absolutely envisage that Sarah and Jennifer knew that their neighbours were starting to be very suspicious of them. Devontae is regularly leaving to go and get food from the neighbours. It wouldn't take a genius to figure out that the reason he was getting that food was because he was telling that family that all the children were hungry. And the fact that potentially he's been found giving food to his siblings would have required an explanation. It doesn't seem like these children are going to lie their way out of it. So the chances are he'll have told them the truth. He'll have told them that the neighbours have been providing them with food because he's been telling them that they're hungry. Jennifer and Sarah Hart are paranoid anyway. Look at how they've lived their life, always moving from place to place. Apparently fiercely private, apart from not all over social media, where you can literally see every single picture of them. Pretty much, if you did a flip book, you'd just see them all growing up, because that's how many photographs they took of those kids, right? But they're very private, very private. And actually really annoys me when people talk about them that way. There's a film that you can watch, a documentary about them. And honestly, on several occasions, I feel physically like I want to confront some of the people that are actually having the conversations about them. They act as if Jennifer and Sarah are these victims. They're victims of circumstance. And that if you really knew them, you would not have these judgments about them. And you're like, you went to festivals with them. You hung out with them for a bit. You don't know them. None of them interviewed knew them. They just knew little bits of them. I mean, we can all behave, can't we? For like a day, particularly if we're at a festival dancing or at a protest surrounded by lots of other people. The truth is, that doesn't make you a good parent, and it doesn't make you capable of not being an abuser. The truth is that you can present however you want to be to the world, but it's what goes on behind closed doors that really, really matters. And sometimes listening to the defense and testimony of their friends, it's galling. It's like, you're allowed to like the people all you want. If you like Jennifer and Sarah Hart, knock yourself out. If you think it all got too much for them, that's okay. But just please, don't try to defend their actions in any way, shape or form. Because on March the 26th, 2018, Jennifer and Sarah Hart basically get their kids in their SUV. They dope them with Benadryl, and my God, I hope that those children were asleep, and they drive to a particular route which they used to really like driving to, and it's basically got a 100-foot cliff on California State Route 1. When the forensics and analytics were looked at on that particular car, they note that they put the throttle down. They sped up purposefully and willfully to the edge of that cliff. They ensured that none of the children were wearing seat belts. And that car went straight over and literally was found destroyed on rocks. It landed upside down on a Pacific Ocean beach. Imagine what they did to those children. 6 children. 6 innocent children driven over a cliff edge purposefully, ensuring that 2 of them went straight through the windscreen. Their bodies were found feet from the car. Devontae, who is 15 at the age, has never been found. I mean, the judge does believe that Devontae was in the vehicle at the time of the crash. In fact, they only managed to find initially 4 of the children, because Kira's body was actually found 2 weeks later. It had floated away. So that just demonstrates how far they were flung from that vehicle. The authorities found that the SUV had been intentionally driven off the edge of the cliff. It had a black box. It recorded the parameters of the drive and the fall. A 14-member coroner's jury unanimously ruled the case a murder-suicide. And the inquest was called to determine the cause of death, but not any responsibility in the civil or criminal fields. Now, a criminal prosecution couldn't occur because the parents were dead. But that familicide was premeditated and planned. Toxicology results showed at the time of the crash, Jennifer Hart was over the alcohol legal limit. And the toxicology tests also found that Sarah Hart and 2 of their children had diphenhydramine in their systems, which is like an antihistamine. We also know that en route to their deaths, Sarah Hart was actually Googling inquiries about Benadryl, presumably the antihistamine, to see whether it would make the children sleep, no-kill shelters because of the dog that they had, and also she wanted to know about what it was like to drown. So obviously if they went over the cliff, she was concerned that if they were in the car, what would it be like if they actually drowned? When investigators looked at this case, one of the things that was clearly themed throughout was the fact that there had been constant child abuse allegations. And actually in familicide, where somebody literally wipes out their entire family and themselves, this is a very common theme. There are pieces of the puzzle that should have been put together, but to some degree weren't in this case. 6 children. 6 children with hard backgrounds. 3 children of which were removed unnecessarily, who could have gone on to live a happy, healthy life. But instead, those 2 women decided that their facade was more important than their children's lives. Because that's what they were protecting. They were protecting their privacy as far as they were concerned. They were protecting themselves. It was them against the world. Remember, they always felt victimized. They always felt ostracized. But actually, it was just their paranoia. It was their poor parenting. They created a whole mythical experience that actually denied the children the reality of their experience. And that's the weird thing in the way that we see things on social media. It's so easy to buy into it, isn't it? But like I said, the pictures I'll put there, you'll see it's so obvious that these kids are being staged. So obvious. Now, I do know that Jennifer Hart's family did try to create a memorial service, but it didn't occur. Not surprised. It's not surprising, is it? Do you fancy going to the funeral of that mum who just drove 6 innocent kids off a cliff and killed them? Probably not. The buffet after would be quite awkward, I would imagine. Now, one of the things that always blows my mind is familicide. This type of familicide is actually relatively rare because this was 2 women who carried it out. And with familicide, it doesn't have to be the person who kills the family also kills themselves. We see in lots of situations, Chris Watts, for example, where somebody will carry out familicide, but they won't kill themselves. In this case, it's 2 women doing it. That's strange because we don't often see that kind of behavior. And it also says something, doesn't it, about their mentality. Remember, it's the us against the world scenario. It's the facade of seeming like the perfect family, and it's crumbling. And they know it's crumbling. And there is a term, anomic familicide. And what that tends to be is a way of preserving and immortalizing the way that the family was, preventing that family changing. It's better to destroy all of their lives at a point where no one else can change it by removing the children, by proving to the world around them that these women are terrible parents. It's a way of preventing that happening. And in my opinion, that's what this particular death fits. It's anomic familicide. It's you cannot change what we have created. We give you no power to do that. We're taking the power back. And in that stressed, anxious state of mind, they would be justifying it to themselves that really no one can do a better job, that nobody will understand, that they've just been being great parents, it's just they're misunderstood. It's incredible how people can self-justify those kind of actions because that's what they're doing, that's what they're actually planning. They're planning that the reason they are doing this is for the good of all of them because they're going to get separated. Even though they have been abusing and starving these children, they still see themselves as the victims. Since meeting, they've been victims. They've been victims of their sexuality. They've been victims of their family. They've been victims of their friends. They've been victims of the services. They've been victims of the neighbours. They've been victims all the way through. Sarah and Jennifer Hart had such massive victim complexes that in the end, they felt that the best way forward was to take 6 beautiful, intelligent, incredible children, drive them off a cliff and murder them. And Devontae's never ever been found. That little boy, that young teen, no one even got to bury him or cremate him, you know. There were no remains found. And I've seen the interviews with Devontae's family. Imagine how it is for them. Imagine how knowing that one fateful day, that one fateful mistake, that all 3 of those children would end up murdered at the hands of 2 women who were meant to protect them. I always struggle with child death. But this kind of child death, 6, already with challenging backgrounds, society didn't just fail them. It fundamentally showed flaws in a system that needs to change. And too often it seems to be that it's only when these events have happened that people start putting the pieces of the jigsaw together. And until that changes, we are going to see this happen again and again and again. I do suggest that you watch the documentary A Thread of Deceit, because it's one of those that is captivating on lots of levels, but one of the main levels is almost the unwillingness of their friends to believe that they were anything but the perfect family. Seriously. They just can't break down the barriers of defense that they feel for them. When you watch it objectively, you're just watching and thinking, what are you saying? You are people who know people online. You are people who genuinely have very little threads of connection, and yet you're defending them. I'm not saying for 1 minute that Jennifer Hart and Sarah Hart did not need help or that they did not feel depressed. I believe that they were struggling massively. But you know, they had options. They didn't have a problem dropping off the teenager when they decided they didn't want her anymore. Why couldn't they have done that with these children? Why did they have to kill them? Because I believe that as much as they felt justified, I think they also felt a lot of rage. I think they felt a lot of anger with those children. And I feel like not giving them a choice at survival was about the biggest God complex that you could have. I know that was a really hard listen. I know that familicide is one of the most distressing types of crime that anyone can hear about, particularly when it involves children, particularly a group of children this large as well. Thanks for listening. If you like my content, please subscribe. I let this content out every single week, same time, same place. I love you listening to me. I love reading the comments. I think this has been a really tough one to cover, but at the same time, it just reactivates that need for us to take seriously when children say that they're being abused. This could have been prevented. This should have been prevented. And to some degree, it also demonstrates that until we take seriously this kind of information, these kind of stories, then it will be repeated again and again and again. Thanks for listening.